Hi, I'm Rex Black, President of RBCS. Welcome to the RBCS YouTube channel. Hey, I hope you enjoy all these free resources that are available here. And do us one favor. We need to keep the lights on and we need your help to do that. So, when you need testing and quality related services, training, consulting, expert services, you name it, let us be one of the bidders on that next job. We don't expect to get all of your business, but we'd like to get a chance. Thanks and enjoy the shows.
Attendees are in listen-only mode.
On behalf of RBCS, RBCS Australia, RBCS New Zealand, and Software TestWorks, we welcome everyone today to this webinar on risk-based testing, what it is and how you can benefit. I am Rex Black, President of RBCS, a worldwide testing and quality assurance firm serving clients ranging from small startups to Fortune 20 global enterprises. Since 1994, RBCS has been both a pioneer and leader in quality hardware and software testing. RBCS has offices in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and Sri Lanka with partners around the world. RBCS delivers insight and confidence to our clients, helping them get quality software and hardware products to market on time and with measurable return on investment. RBCS has a team of international consultants that deliver customized training, consulting, and outsourcing services for companies that are looking to improve their test and quality assurance practices. RBCS has helped hundreds of companies reduce development and support costs while ensuring the best quality products are delivered to their customers. I'm the author of 6 books on testing: Pragmatic Software Testing, Advanced Software Testing Volumes 1 and 2, Foundations of Software Testing, Critical Testing Processes, and Managing the Testing Process. I hold a degree in Computer Science and Engineering from UCLA. I am also past president of the International Software Testing Qualifications Board and the American Software Testing Qualifications Board. Before we start the presentation, a few housekeeping notes. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, please feel free to submit them throughout the presentation at any time via your webinar interface. There's no need to ask for presentation copies. The presentation is on the web at www.rbcs-us.com. Now, if you are having problems with the audio or video, please contact GoToWebinar support. If for whatever reason you cannot get to the webinar online and you're dealing with an unreliable connection, then please download the slides from the basic library at www.rbcs-us.com and be sure to use the telephone to connect, not voice over IP. Now, we don't really tend to see a lot of problems with this, so I don't expect that you would have any problems, but that's a fallback if you should happen to run into those. And one more note before we start, something that you won't hear very often. I'm guessing you'll probably never hear me say again at the beginning of one of these webinars. Greetings from the snowy Texas Hill Country. Snow falls about once every 5 years or so here in Bulverde, and this is one of those years. So I'm sitting next to a fire, it contained in a fireplace, of course, in the RBCS office, watching snow fall outside, which is about as risk-free a setting as you can imagine. Nevertheless, today's presentation is on risk-based testing. One of the key problems in testing is how to select from an infinite set of tests a finite subset of tests that adequately mitigates the risk of quality problems after release and allows you to understand the remaining level of risk of quality problems that exist when you release. In addition, testers need to be able to allocate effort intelligently, sequence the tests to find important problems first, and if necessary, reduce the test coverage to hold to hard delivery dates while not inadvertently spawning a post-release disaster. So risk-based testing provides a practical means for achieving these goals, and this webinar is about showing you how it does that. Okay, so as I said, there's an infinite number of tests that you could conceivably run. This is for any realistic size system, and that's a problem because you don't have forever to test. You don't have an infinite amount of time and resource. So one of the central challenges of testing is the selection problem. You are going to select a finite number of tests out of that infinite cloud. The question is, You're going to do it smart and in a way that that provides maximum value, or are you going to sort of wander around in the infinite cloud and beat on things until you run out of time and money, which is not very smart. I mean, ultimately, no matter what you do, if you divide the number of tests that you have run by the number of tests that you could run, which is your coverage of what you could test, that number is always going to be 0%. So we do need to be really smart and really selective. The idea that we're going to luck upon the right set of tests to run, just find them by sheer luck from wandering around in the infinite cloud, the probabilities of that happening are extremely low. So we need a strategy. We need a smart strategy. So that's what risk-based testing is about. It's about a strategy for that selection problem, and provides a few other benefits as well. So let's define what we're looking at here. A risk is the possibility of a negative or undesirable outcome. So it's basically a bad thing that could happen. Now, there are two important elements there. One is the element of possibility. In other words, it has to be something that could happen, not something that can't happen, which is an impossibility, which we're not worried about impossibilities. And it can't be something that's certain to happen, because that's a constraint, and we're not worried about constraints here. I mean, you do have to worry about your constraints, but that's not what we're focused on for risk-based testing. Now, the other element that's essential for something to be a risk, in addition to possibility, is the element of badness, of negativity. It has to be a bad thing that could happen in order to be a risk. So, I mean, a good thing that could happen is an opportunity, but this is not about opportunity-based testing. Maybe one of the listeners today will come up with an opportunity-based testing strategy someday, but that's not what I'm talking about here. Now, specifically, when we talk about risk-based testing, the specific kinds of risks that we're focused on are quality risks. Quality risk is the possibility that the product of the system might fail to deliver one or more key quality attributes. So there's something that it should be able to do, or some way in which it should behave. In other words, some functional or non-functional characteristic of this thing that it doesn't have. System responds too slowly to user input. That's a quality risk. System calculates incorrect value for shopping cart total. That's also a quality risk. Now, when these things happen, when quality risks happen, then they endanger your ability to get the kind of quality outcomes that you want. Quality outcomes are things like satisfied customers, repeat customers, system conforming to requirements, so it's very clear what it does, absence of support calls, or at least a moderate number of support calls, profitability of the company. These are all outcomes that we get if we have quality. So ultimately, we manage quality risks for the purpose of achieving those good outcomes that we want that are associated with having a quality product. So the specific means by which we're going to enable this risk-based testing is we're going to analyze quality risks. And an analysis involves two main parts here, which I will talk about in detail. One is the identification of quality risk items, such as system response too slow to user input, and also the assessment of the level of risk associated with each quality risk item based on two factors, likelihood and impact, which we'll discuss a lot more later. And based on the risk items and their associated levels of risk, we are going to prioritize our tests, in other words, sequence them, and we're going to allocate testing effort based on those. So that's going to focus and order our testing. So it really is indeed risk-based in that everything that we do is going to ultimately be based on risk items that were identified and their associated levels of risk. Now, this process, in order to work, 15 or so years that I've been doing risk-based testing, the thing that I found is essential to make it work is good cross-functional project stakeholder participation. This has to include both business stakeholders and technical stakeholders. If you cannot get those people to engage, you cannot get this process to work. It will not identify a complete set of risks, and it will not assess the appropriate likelihood and impact for the risk that it does identify. So very, very important that all of the right stakeholders be involved in this process. So I'm going to talk about the process going forward here, of course, and it's certainly doing the process right matters, but more than anything else, the right people involved in the process matters. This is a fairly resilient approach that I've come up with over the years, and it can tolerate a few mistakes here and there, but the one mistake that it can't tolerate is the wrong people involved in the process. So make sure that you keep that in mind as you go through this. Now, risk-based testing also looks at project risks, but no more than any other form of testing really should. Any other strategy of testing should also look at project risks. Now, it's important to be able to distinguish between a project risk and a quality risk. So, as I said, a quality risk could be something like system responds too slowly to user input, or system calculates incorrect total for shopping cart. Now, a project risk would be a bad thing that can happen that could endanger our ability to successfully complete the product, or at least carry out the project as planned. So you think about things that could affect our ability to carry out the project as planned. Loss of a key project team member, like your best tester quits. That's a project risk. Or test environments not available when needed. That's also another typical testing-related project risk. So certainly we want to identify and manage those risks, but that's going to be done in the test plan, and that's not really what risk-based testing is or should be focused on. This is a common source of confusion in people who are just getting started doing risk-based testing, as they spend time thinking about project risks, and that's all well and good, but that's not the focus. The focus in risk-based testing is on quality risks. So try to keep that in mind as we go through this discussion. Okay, so what are the benefits of risk-based testing? What exactly are we trying to do with this thing? So risk-based testing is a testing strategy. So like any strategy, it's independent of project. It is a general methodology for going about testing and organizing testing. You have to have a plan that actually implements that on any given project. And if you carry out the strategy properly and the plan properly implements the strategy on a given project, you should get at least 3 benefits, and maybe 4 depending on your project. So the first one, think about the ideal testing project where everything you did went perfectly, and think specifically about test execution. If the test execution went perfectly and you took the bugs that you found and you sorted them from most important to least important, and you can actually impose that hard order on them, then you could, in perfect risk-based testing approach, you could see that the order in which you found the bugs was exactly the same as the order of importance. Now, that's never actually going to happen perfectly, but you would like to create a situation where that you come as close to doing that as you possibly could. And the reason for this is that, excuse me, that late discovery of important bugs creates significant schedule and quality risks for the organization. And schedule risk in the sense that you might have to slip the schedule to be able to deal with the important bug. Quality risk in that we might not be able to slip the schedule, and so we might release with that bug. So You really do want to find the scary stuff first. And because the tests are going to be run in risk order, and because risk is based on likelihood and impact, the tests that have the highest likelihood of finding the most important bugs are going to be run first. And that's going to basically stack the deck in favor of us finding the bugs in severity or priority order. Now, the other benefit that you'll get is the efficient allocation of test effort based on risk, so that you have the minimum possible residual level of quality risk upon release based on the effort that you spend. Because we are focused on risk, targeting on risk, then we want to minimize what risk is left at the end. So basically, that's picking the right set of tests out of this infinite cloud of possible tests that will properly minimize the residual level of risk to quality at the end of that process. Now, the next benefit has to do with reporting of results. And one of the things that risk-based testing will allow you to do is not only to minimize the residual level of quality risk, but actually to know what that level of quality risk is, and to make smart release decisions based on that residual level of quality risk. Basically, what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to decide when to release when the risk of delay is balanced against the risk of dissatisfaction. Now, without risk-based testing and without this benefit of being able to measure your test results based on risk and report based on risk, the risk of dissatisfaction, risk of quality problems always gets short-changed in this decision-making process because it's the one that's less visible. Risk of delay, I mean, everybody knows when the project's supposed to be done. I mean, that's obvious. But not everybody knows what an acceptable level of quality risk is, and not everybody can visualize that. Everybody understands what a delay looks like and what the consequences of delay are. At least I tend to understand pretty quickly once brought up to speed on it by the angry project managers. But the risks of quality problems, not so clearly seen unless you can actually bring them out into the light and show them. And that's another benefit of risk-based testing, that you can actually talk about risks that are mitigated and risks that are not mitigated as you approach the end of the project, and people can make smart release decisions. Now, here's another benefit that you might need, and you might actually receive, because the tests are going to be derived from the risks and will inherit the level of risk, their associated level of risk from the risk that they came from. We will not only be able to run the tests in risk order, but we'll also be able to drop them in reverse risk order if we need to. So if we get schedule compressed, let's say that you had 6 weeks to test and then it gets cut down to 4. You now need to identify a third of your tests to drop. How are you going to do that? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to look at those test cases that have the lowest level of risk. And those are the ones that you can give up with the least possible increase in the level of quality risk. You can afford to give up these tests because you're not worried about them as much as the others. So this test triage benefit, if you will, is one that you don't always need, but if you get schedule compressed, it is sure handy to have, because there really aren't a whole lot of good alternatives to being able to do risk-based test triage if you're in a crunch, and so it's a very useful benefit when needed. So basically, this is all about making you more efficient, more focused, more targeted, and that becomes especially important when you're time constrained or resource constrained. Anytime you're dealing with constraints, it's more important to do everything right and do only the right things, and that's what risk-based testing is about. Now, sometimes people say, oh, well, this sounds good, this idea of risk-based testing, but my God, we're going to have to do this quality risk analysis, and it could take a long time, and isn't this going to add a lot of work? No, it will not. It will not increase the amount of effort required from the test team, and it's really only a modest amount of effort that we're asking for from the stakeholders. I'll get into this a little bit more later, but the amount of effort that for you as the test person, assuming you're going to be in charge of leading the quality risk analysis and so forth, really what you're looking at is less than 40 hours at the beginning doing the first risk analysis if you're doing a big project and it's following some sequential type of life cycle model, and then that's going to require only periodic updates from you. And 40 hours is pretty much worst case. We've seen it done, the initial risk analysis done in as little as 20 hours. And if you're following an agile type of life cycle, then your risk analysis really might be as brief as an hour or two, and sort of bolted on to the whole process of defining the user stories. So in exchange for that moderate investment of your time, what you will get back is a really significant increase in your efficiency and your focus, and what you might very well find is that some things can fall off the plate, if you will. They can be dropped, and thus the long-term effect, as I said, will be to decrease the test effort. All right, now I've been talking about this in the abstract, and what I want to do now is shift gears totally to being very specific and taking a case study, because I think I can illustrate what this is like and what it feels like to work on a project that's doing risk-based testing, to be involved in that process better if I walk you through a case study. So one of our clients, CA, is a big fan of this stuff, and they've done a number of pilot launches of risk-based testing, and I've been myself and my associates have been involved in those. Been very successful, done them around the world. And this case study actually describes the first pilot of risk-based testing that we did for them at their offices in Pittsburgh. So there were 6 main activities that were involved in this pilot. The first 3 basically were done during the initial week of my being there, and then the remaining ones were done over the course of the project. So there's one-day training of the stakeholders on risk-based testing, how it works. There's a one-day quality risk analysis session, which I will describe in detail here in a minute. There's analysis and refinement of the quality risk analysis to make sure that we've got the risks right and the ratings right. Then, as the pilot continued during the project, there was an alignment of the testing with the quality risks, guiding the testing based on the risks, and assessing the benefits and lessons at the end as a sort of a retrospective. Now, obviously, a lot of things went on in that project and in that week, and I'm going to try to touch on what I consider to be the key points to take away from that, the most important things. Obviously, there are more details about this pilot, and if you go out to the RBCS website on the, I believe it's the Resources Basic Library selection, you'll find an article that we wrote, myself and 2 of the other people involved in the pilot, describing the pilot. So I believe it's on the basic library page, or it might also be on the articles page. So you can read a full 10 or 12 page description that's a little bit more complete than what I can touch on here in this webinar, and get a better sense of the details. I also want to mention that in addition to this article out on the website, we do have a sequence of videos that we're doing over the year that are coming out, free videos. They're in the digital library, and they're also on, I think they're on iTunes and YouTube, and you can get to them there. And these will also go into more detail on specific points of the risk-based testing process, and they're free resources. In addition, there is a video of a 2.5-hour presentation that I did in Melbourne in Australia on risk-based testing that covers not just what I'm going to talk about today, but a number of other additional details like life cycle models and details of how to document and options for different ways of approaching things and so forth. So that's on the digital library page if you're interested in that. So this is going to be kind of a and I wouldn't say a quick overview, but I would say a selective summary, if you will, or selective examination of some of the key things that happened during that pilot. And just want to make sure you're aware that there's a lot more additional supporting information available on the website, so you can drill into some of the details of what I'm going to touch upon here. But let's look at these 6 activities and talk about what happens with that and what did happen in this case. So the first thing, on the first day of the 1-week pilot, we did a training for the participants and the stakeholders. Now, I would encourage you, if you are going to do risk-based testing, that you do have a training session that ideally everybody who's going to participate, including the business and technical stakeholders, for the first time they go through that so that they understand what they're doing. Now, I know that sometimes that can be a tough sell, and maybe some of the stakeholders will say, oh, I really don't have time for that. But if you can get them in there, that's great. At the very least, you'd want to make sure that all the people in the test team who are going to be involved in risk-based testing have gone through this process. So the 1-day training, it takes a while for the team to get to consensus around what the different impact ratings are and what they mean. We rated likelihood and impact each on a 5-point scale, so very high, high, medium, low, and very low. So each of those we had a 5-point scale. And we did have defined criteria for what fit into each point on that scale. But still, you struggle with adjusting the criteria and internalizing the criteria too, especially with impact. Now, another thing that happens as you go through and do the assessment of the risk items is that you will identify duplicates. And then duplicates will happen. 2 people have the same idea. Now, in the big group brainstorming session, duplicates happen less. In the sequence of one-on-one interviews, though, I should mention this, that you will tend to get a fairly significant number of duplicates as you get to the end of the interviews. And that's actually a good thing, because that indicates that the people that you've talked to collectively have run out of ideas. And you want to, if you're doing the interview approach, you want to continue to do the interviews until you reach that point of convergence where you are getting a lot of duplicates from people that you talk to. But in the group brainstorming, if you identify a duplicate, you can just say, okay, well, this is a dupe of another one. Now, usually I want to capture that in my documentation, but I don't want to count it as a separate risk item. And if there are overlapping risk items, then you can reword them, since you have the stakeholders in the room, and reword them to be non-overlapping. So at the end of this overall session, we have 92 risk items that we have identified, and 40% of those have been rated. And we've come to a sort of a meeting of the minds, as it were, across the stakeholders about how to rate these risk items, how to assign the likelihood and impact values. So after the session, the test manager went off on the next day and spent some time working one-on-one with some of the other participants to finalize the ratings. And that can happen. That's not a big disaster. If you don't finish all of the ratings in the brainstorming session, at least you should have achieved a consensus about what the different ratings mean, and kind of struggle with that a little bit. So on this slide, you see an excerpt. It was basically what the documents look like, or documents look like at the end of that day session. So I want to point out a few key things here. I'm going to leave aside this header at the top. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Now let me point out, here's the category. So the category of functionality here, and we have, as I said, about 20 or so other categories that are of interest. And every risk item has a risk ID number, which we can use for traceability in the test management system, whatever test management system we use. So 1.001 is Unix system services compatibility issues. Okay? And so that's a risk item. That's been assessed as a 4, which is low likelihood. We use a descending scale where the smaller numbers, 1, 2, were at the higher end of the scale, and the bigger numbers, 4 and 5, were at the lower end of the scale, with 3 in the middle. So we get, this is a very low, or excuse me, a low likelihood, and a 3 impact, so that's a medium impact. And now, based on those two ratings, likelihood and impact, we calculate an aggregate measure of risk by multiplying those two things together. So 4 times 3 is 12. And I'm calling that the risk priority number, or RPN. It's an acronym that you'll see me using as I go along here. And so the RPN, risk priority number, is, as I said, the aggregate level of risk, or aggregate metric of risk for the risk item, and that's going to drive sequencing of the tests that relate to that risk item, and it's going to drive triage of tests, if necessary, that are related to that risk item. And it's also going to be used to determine the extent of testing through a mechanism that I'm going to show you a little bit later. Now, take a look at this guy here, 1.005, new commands do not function. Now you see here we get TBD, TBD, and of course the pound sign here where the calculation didn't work because it tried to calculate multiplying two strings together. TBD, meaning to be determined, is we got a note to Jim here. Jim Castee, the test manager in charge of this, might need to break this out for each new command. So Jim's got an action item to go off and think about this and see if it needs to be broken out, and if it does, then we're going to have different likelihood and impact ratings for each one of those. So that's how this works. Now you can see down here at the bottom, we see we got a place to capture the project risk, the byproducts that we identified. So that's in the template, and then miscellaneous, any other issues that come up, we captured there. And then the risk levels and the extent of testing are defined in this worksheet. So that what a very high impact versus a high impact versus a medium impact versus a low impact versus a very low impact means, it's defined in there. And then the mapping from the RPN to the extent of testing is also defined in that other worksheet. So this is pretty much a comprehensive collection of the information. So that's where we are at the end of the session. Now, once Jim finished getting the ratings done, the risk priority number, or RPN, is now calculated for each item based on that formula. And as I said, likelihood and impact are rated on a 5-point scale, so we've got risk priority numbers ranging from 1 to 25. And because I used a descending scale, where the larger numbers are the smaller risk, then for the risk priority number, 1 is the most risky. It's very likely to happen, and when it happens, it's going to be very bad, basically. And 25 is the least risky. It's very unlikely, and even if it did happen, odds are real good. Nobody would care. Now, obviously, since so much is dependent on these ratings being right, the sequencing of the tests, the allocation of effort, the triage of the tests if need be, the reporting of the results, we need to make sure that these assessments are correct. So we need to look at these assessments and make sure they are correct. And one of the things that can go wrong, frequently does go wrong to some extent, it's not a big deal, but it's a problem that needs to be identified and solved, is clumping of the risk ratings. So basically clumping is when you have a lot of the risk items having a single risk rating, particularly one that's kind of shoved to one side or the other of the distribution. Now, that can occur for a number of reasons. There are a couple that are particularly common. One is the skewing of the impact. So when the people involved in doing the risk assessment, when they look at the risk items, say, oh, you know, this is something really horrible could happen if that happened, and so, you know, it's a very high impact, and then pretty quick everything starts being a very high impact. A lot of times that's happening because people are basing their ratings on worst case possible outcomes. You want to remember when you're rating the impact to think about what's the most likely typical kind of production problem, field failure we get related to this risk item. So, you know, for example, if we're talking about system response too slowly to user input, don't think about the most catastrophic performance problem you could possibly have. You know, think about, well, when we have that kind of, as principles of and rationale for risk-based testing. So what are we trying to accomplish, and what are the basic principles of it, what are the benefits? Then a discussion of categories of quality risk. Now, there are some 24 categories of quality risks that you want to be sure to look at in your quality risk analysis. It's not just functionality. A lot of people make the mistake of just looking at functionality, but you want to look at performance and reliability and maintenance and localization and a number of other of these categories in order to make sure that you cover all the important attributes. And out on the RBCS website, again, I believe it's on the basic library page, towards the bottom, you'll find associated with quality risk analysis process a generic quality risks checklist that has the 24 or so quality risk categories in it, and I'd encourage you to take a look at that if you're curious about what those are. Training continued to cover the analysis of quality risks, and so the identification and assessment, how to align the testing with the levels of risk, how to document quality risks in a lightweight yet adequate and maintainable template, how to monitor quality risks during test execution and report risk-based test results. So this training is a one-day training. It's a presentation and discussion and exercise. We include this at the beginning of all of our one-week risk-based testing jump starts as a first step. We also have this available as a one-day standalone training, and we'll also have it available now as an e-learning, so we have a number of resources that support this. So with the training done, we now move on into the actual quality risk analysis session. Now, I'm going to talk in a second about how we did it here, but I want to make sure that you're aware that you have basically two options. So one option that you can use for quality risk analysis is a sequence of one-on-one interviews with the various business and technical stakeholders. And each of those interviews lasts about 90 to 120 minutes. So that's roughly the time investment that you're looking for from the various stakeholders. And you will go through and identify quality risks based on the quality risk categories that I mentioned with each of those stakeholders. And you will also assess the likelihood and impact of those quality risks, each of the quality risk items, with those same stakeholders. And so everybody contributes their own piece to that list, and then it's a good idea at the end of the week, usually that's about how long it takes to interview the business and technical stakeholders. At the end of that week, you do a quick, say, 1 hour, maybe 2 hour review meeting with the stakeholders who participated to go through the final list and make sure that they're okay with it. So each stakeholder's total investment of time is maybe 2 hours, maybe 4 hours, total across those two events, the interviews and the review meeting. So that is one way to do it. Now, another way to do it is the way that we did it here in the Pittsburgh in this particular launch, which is the big group brainstorming session. In the big group brainstorming session, you get together all of the stakeholders in a room, and you go through that brainstorming process with them, and it takes all day. Now, obviously, this is a larger investment of time. It's easily twice as much, if not more, of the stakeholders who are participating in the risk analysis. Now, the benefit to them and to you and to everybody really is that the brainstorming approach, where everybody's together at once, does a much better job of better job of identifying risks and especially assessing the likelihood and impact associated with the risk and building a consensus about what the different likelihood and impact ratings mean. But I would say, if you can't get people to commit to doing the big group brainstorming session, don't feel like, oh, woe is us and we're not going to get the benefits out of this. We have plenty of clients that use the one-on-one interview approach, and they're perfectly happy with it. In fact, most of the projects now at CA, when they do the pilots, they're going with the one-on-one interview approach. So we think that's very common for clients to do that. I don't think you're going to lose a whole lot. It's a little bit more work for you as the test person driving this process to try to build the consensus and to achieve agreement on some of the ratings and so forth. But it's still, very practical approach, and it works just fine either way. Anyway, back to our case study. So we have the brainstorming that's going to go on all day, and so we broke that all-day session into two subsessions. So the first is an identification session, and what I did was I took the main quality risk categories out of that checklist and wrote them on whiteboards. We had 3 whiteboards in the meeting room, which is really nice. I'd recommend that if you're going to do this that way in that brainstorming session, try to use this approach. And you write the risk categories on these whiteboards and leave plenty of space, so that's why the 3 whiteboards is important. And then you give the participants in the risk analysis the sticky note pads and pens, and then say, look, write your risk items on the sticky notes, leaving a little bit of space at the bottom of them, and just go and stick them under the appropriate category. And, people look at each other's risk items as they're going up and sticking them up there on the whiteboard, and they talk to each other and think about what the product does and so forth. And so that went on for about 3 hours before we finally just ran out of steam, and nobody had any new ideas for risk items. And we had 100 of them, which is fairly typical. 100 to 200 risk items is a fairly typical number to get. We also identified some byproducts during that risk analysis of 11 project risks and 3 other issues. Now, this will tend to happen, and don't worry about it if it does, but don't get hung up on these project risks. Remember, they're byproducts. You just want to identify them and move on. So at that point, it was noon, and we took a break for lunch. And I think the break for lunch is a good idea. If you're going to do these all-day brainstorming sessions, give people a chance to sort of walk away from it and go off and do something else with their brain for an hour. I would not try to do the catered lunch and then try to cram more brainstorming or risk assessment into the lunch hour. I think that's just too much. So we took an hour lunch break. People came back afterwards, and we went through each of the risk items and assessed them. And we rated the likelihood and impact for each risk item. So I would go through, read the risk item off on the sticky pad, and then ask, okay, what do we think the likelihood of this is? What do we think the impact is? Now, likelihood, let's be clear about what likelihood is. Likelihood is the likelihood that when you receive something to test, it will contain one or more bugs related to the risk item. So that's the likelihood rating for the risk item. The impact is, let's assume that the product did contain one or more bugs related to the risk item, and we didn't find it, and it went out to the customer. So now the customer is being faced with the typical kind of bug that we have and related to this risk item. How bad would that be from a business sense? Okay, so likelihood is a technical question, and the technical stakeholders obviously going to have more insight into this. Impact is a business question, and impact is more subjective. So what we typically find when we do these launches with clients is that the likelihood ratings are not too terribly hard to do, but impact, it takes